Don Husselmer is going to be speaking Saturday, April 6th at 2 p.m. with puddle jumpers about gas electrics, otherwise known as doodle bugs. And then we're going to have Gary Holtzinger Saturday, March 16th at 2 p.m. here. Also Zoom, Chicago, Anamosa, Northern. He'll have books for sale here also. And then we have Doug today, so with the Moingona line. So we'll start there. Okay, here's Doug.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about the original transcontinental first railroad across the United States, the segment that runs from Boone to Ogden through Moingona. Before we get started, a couple things. One is, been here most of my life. Nobody's run me out, so I'm still here. And I'm older than most of you. So if you want to argue, I'm not interested in that, but I can argue. Anyway, remember, if you got a little money in your pocket when you leave, and if you haven't been insulted, leave the money. There's a donation box over here on to the left on the wall. Otherwise, and you don't have to donate, but it'd be nice. They like heating the place. So here we are to enjoy that today. So we're going to start in Boone, and we're going to work our way to Ogden. And it's not all going to be chronological. So you kind of have to pay attention to the dates, because we're going to do something, then we're going to jump back 10 years and whatever. And I haven't done this program this way before, so we'll see how muddled it gets. So we're going to start with Boone. And here's the map. So hand drawn to bless you. So as we look down as we go down the line, I put a little X here, and that little X is approximately where Kate Shelley's house is. And of course, the big elephant in the room is Kate Shelley. For a country girl who had no great aspirations, she was in the right spot to have a spotlight on her life much of the time, from the time she was 15 until she died. So the house sits up on a hillside next to the railroad grade. And all these lines here are railroad grades, except the one running down through the middle is the Des Moines River. It has the little cross hatches. And it's roughly 5 miles from Moingona to Boone and 5 miles to Ogden, a little under that. And so we're going to start with Boone. So first picture we have of Boone was the first depot built at Boone. The railroad came to Boone in 1865 from Marshalltown. And they built this building. And at that time, railroads didn't know what a dining car was. And so this building contained a large kitchen and a place to eat, and so on. And so it was designed for the train to stop, and the patrons on the train would have dinner or breakfast or whatever time it was. And that stood for quite a few years. It was called Montana to begin with, and most of us probably know that. And they called it Montana because Boonesboro is just down the road. I guess it differentiated, and then eventually they renamed it Boone in 4 or 5 years. And then Boone and Boonesboro came together, and everything was Boone. And now we have West Boone, which is where the county courthouse is. So this would have been where you would have gotten off the train in 1865. It was the end of the line. That year they built the track down along the river to the spot where they were going to cross the river and build a bridge. So in the winter of 1865, 1866, they built the bridge across the river. And we're going to talk about that a little later. Here's the second depot. So in 1893, the first depot had burnt, and this is what replaced it. And this is a picture taken out quite a bit after 1893. But because I was a bike dealer, we needed to get the bike in. So usually bikes hanging around the depots would have been somebody delivering messages. The agent would have known the messages would come in over the wire, knowing telegraphy, and he would write out the message and give it to the messenger, and he'd ride his bike to wherever to deliver it. So in the old days, lots of depot pictures had bicycles. Anyway, next picture. This is a shot of the first depot, first roundhouse, and it would have been just east of Story Street, where there's not anything now. And this is some of a typical crew and the locomotive drivers. You can see a pair of them sitting there on the left. Almost all the locomotives at this time in 1860s would have been 440s, and they could barely pull their own weight, let alone some other cars. So trains were short and relatively easy to work on, and they worked on them all the time. This is a picture taken just a little bit further east. They're starting to build the second yard in Boone. The first one was just right east of Story Street. This one's further out, and it's the one we see today all the time. They needed it bigger and do more things with it. The cool thing about this one is they have a sanding tower, and there were enough trains running, especially because of the line down to Moingona, needed pushers to get the trains up the hill. And so there were always pushers stationed at Moingona to push both east and west. And so they had provisions to put sand in the locomotives on both sides so they could do two at once. And the sand would disappear in a hurry on the grades. The grade down to Moingona, it's about 200 feet between Boone and Moingona. And so the grade roughly 1%. And the little locomotives they had at that time, they needed lots of sand. Next picture. This is an overall view. You can see the roundhouse they built. And over here is the big back shop where they would completely tear down the locomotive and rebuild them. And that came roughly 1912, 1913 when they were building these facilities. This hole in the ground here is kind of part of a reservoir that was there to provide water for the steam engines from 1865 when the railroad first got here. And Boone had a problem with water. And they never had enough water for the locomotives all the time. And so frequently, well, especially the helpers, but frequently trains coming through wouldn't get water at Boone because there wasn't any. They would have to get it in Moingona where there was a good well. So here they had a reservoir, and this is part of where the reservoir was. And on the day of the flood, it'd be July 6th, 1881, the reservoir was overwhelmed with water. It blew out the reservoir. And part of the problem down at Cape Shelley's was the reservoir's water washed down through Boone and down into Honey Creek and onto the river where she lived. Next picture. If somebody's got a burning question while we're doing this, you can yell out. And if it's a question that's going to take an hour to answer, hold it until afterwards and talk to me then. I don't know who these guys are, but they are cool. This is a locomotive engineer and a fireman. And most pictures I've seen with firemen have a smaller shovel in it. So this guy must have been pretty gritty. Anyway, I just threw that in because I really like that picture. Next. Okay, so we're starting down the grade to Moingona. And this is a train coming up the grade to Boone, and tracks ran right west of the cemetery. I used to say they used to go right through the Dairy Queen. A lot of people wouldn't know where that was. Okay, so next picture. Here's another passenger coming up into Boone. Very typical, locomotive and 4 cars, sometimes 3 cars, sometimes 5, not really long trains. And so they can handle the grade. If the trains get too heavy, then they need a helper. Next picture. So here's a freight train coming into Boone. And this has 2 locomotives. And so this is the road locomotive with the train. And this is the, sometimes people call them pushers, but they're really a helper. They connected to the front of the train down at Moingona and helped it up the grade. And in this time period, early 1900s, if the train got very long, like over 20 cars, sometimes you might see 3 of these engines helping. Okay, next. Okay, we're now down to the X on the picture. This is Kate Shelley's house. It was built by her dad, Michael. Michael came from Ireland, and he was, for his day, a fairly stout guy. He could whip most everybody, and so he was elected to be the foreman on the right-of-way crew that took care of the track. And back in the old days, he was called a section boss. And in the old days, about every 5 miles or so, there would be a section, and there would be 3 or 4 people, or depending on the terrain, maybe even more, who would take care of that section, make sure the rails are aligned and so on. Anyway, so he was a section boss, and he built this place. You can see on the cheap, and you can get an idea of how luscious the Shelley farm was in the background. It was built on a hillside. There was almost no farm ground. It was mostly timber and brush. And you can see how they got a flat place to build the house. They just kind of pushed dirt up, and you got ramshackle fences to hold back the dirt and whatever. Anyway, this would be Kate. And Michael Shelley got sick, and they couldn't figure out. He went all over trying to get cured, probably some kind of cancer. But anyway, he died in 1878. So leaving a wife and 5 children. Next picture. So we're here, this spot. And so the big day is coming. Next picture. So this was called Shelley's Curve. And that was only later. But as you look at the picture, the Des Moines River Bridge is right there. And the train had come from Moingona and through the bridge, and it's coming around the circle. And there's a bridge right here under the first locomotive. Kind of see that, you can see the abutments there. And of course, the first one would be a helper, and the second one would be the road locomotive. And that train has 15 or 16 cars on it, so 1 helper. If it had more, it'd be 2 helpers. And this picture was taken well after the train accident, because this bridge has stone bridge abutments. And the original bridge here would have been just pile bridge, just timbers. And probably, maybe not even piles. The bridge might have just been on they lay a plank down, and then they build the bridge on these planks which lay on the ground. Okay, next picture. This is a picture of the original bridge that they built in 1865-66 across the river. And here is the east side, and there was a little shack right here for a bridge watch, because every steam engine that went across this wooden bridge, they'd have to walk the bridge to make sure it wasn't burning down. And this was called, I'm not a bridge expert, it's called a Howe truss. And it was fortified or made stronger by, it has a whole bunch of iron stringers through the wooden bridge. Give it extra strength. So this is the bridge Kate's gonna crawl across. And when you look at the track, and I don't have a picture of that, because the trains were light, there was a tie, space between the ties was about 18 inches, foot and a half. So big, you could easily drop down between two ties and have the river come up and smack you. Next picture. So now we're to Moingona, and this is the sort of a standard Chicago Northwestern depot. It had a place to sleep, a second floor on the east half. And then down below would be where the agent was and a waiting room and so on. And then this would be the freight room. And in 1866, Moingona was just a raw town. It wasn't too big, but it already had coal mines. There was a timber industry. There were lots of trees. The river valley was relatively full of trees. Here we're looking here 30 some years later. A lot of the trees have already disappeared. So the cool thing about this is it shows this is the eastbound helper. Nope. We'll try it. I only have two choices. I missed it. This is the westbound helper, and this is the eastbound helper. And so they're just sitting there waiting for trains to come. And so 24 hours a day, there's two helpers sitting there unless there's a train being helped. And so there's crews, and then there's the agent, and there's a freight agent, and so there's lots of railroaders around here. And again, they have a water tank with a good water supply. So a lot of the road trains would stop, take water, you'd add on the pusher or the helper and go your way. So you can see that the westbound engine locomotive that's coming this way is pointed that way. And you can see the back of the other one is pointed towards Boone. Okay, next picture. So now we jump back to the events all over with, and Kate, well, anyway, so we're just skipping ahead a little bit. This is Kate's new house. This happened after several years after she crawled across the bridge and stopped the train. And with the money, some of the money they had, the old shack they lived in disappeared. And in 1890, she crawled across the bridge, 1881. This is 1890. They have a new house built, new barn, fences that actually look like fences, so on. Pretty nice. So anyway, we need a map. I don't know, is that what's coming next, honey? So when I put this, okay, so this is good enough. So the night of the flood, this is the bridge. This isn't the bridge. This is the one that replaced the bridge. But this is where the locomotive went through into the creek. So right back over here is the river bridge, and right up a little further back there is the depot. And so the night of the storm, the dispatcher sent word to Moingona that the pushers should go out and check the rails from both directions to see if all the bridges are still in. Well, the one that came east to Boone, first bridge he came to, he fell through. So he wasn't being super cautious. There were 4 men on the locomotive, and 2 of them, and the locomotive was really one pointed towards Ogden, so the locomotive was coming backwards. 2 men were up on the tender, and then the locomotive engineer and the fireman were running the engine. And they backed up, and when they got to this point, they got up about 12 feet or 15 feet out on the bridge, and it fell through. And then the bridge is 82 feet long. The locomotive went down into the creek, and of the 4 men, 2 survived. And so Kate and her mother, their house is up over here and over to the X. We're gonna have a map down there. anyway, she had to come through the timber up high to get there. So this,
Sorry.
okay,
Okay.
go the next one up. Next, okay, so this is the next crossing above the one we've been looking at. The next one up toward Boone. It's a longer bridge and it's the same Honey Creek. Honey Creek is kind of snaking down, going, you know, under the right of way in different places. So between this bridge and the one we were just looking at, the one we were just looking at is right over here. You can't see it in this picture. And this is Kate's house. This is the old original house. So she was here, she heard the train come through here. And then later, so the men were down and she went, her path to get to the train was up here high because all this is underwater. She came high over to where the other bridge is, where the wreck is. And she saw that there were two men there in the trees, but they were okay. And she couldn't hear them. It was so noisy from the water gushing through. And she thought the passenger train was coming from the west. She knew that it always came through at this time. And so she, in her mind, was trying to save that train. In actuality, the dispatcher had stopped the train at Scranton, Iowa, which is 40 miles west of here. They'd also stopped the other trains east of there at Marshalltown. So anyway, she doesn't know that. So she sees that there's two men hanging in the trees. And so she, next picture. This might be a surprise for me. Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is.
Well, we don't
surprise.
want that picture.
Okay, go back.
So if you can find the map.
Didn't we just see it?
So she sees the guys hanging in the trees and she decides she's gonna have, so she's right about right there. And she's come from the house on the hillside to there. And then she has to walk, run, whatever she did to get to the bridge. And then when you get to the bridge, you got that big gaps between the ties. And so she took a hold of the rail and crawled across this bridge. The bridge is, I've forgotten now, about 800 feet long. So she crawled 800 feet, and that way she wouldn't fall between the ties as she kept a hold of the rail. And when she got to the other end, then she had about a quarter of a mile. The thing about this story's been told so much, and there's so much. So one person will say, well, it's an eighth of a mile to the depot, and the next one says it's a quarter of a mile to the depot, and I haven't measured it, but anyway, it's a distance to the depot. So she makes it to the depot and tells the agent that the helper that they had sent out had gone through the bridge. Well, about that time, they'd also sent a helper in the other direction to check the bridges there too, because it was being rained on that side of the river too. And about that time, the other helper came back and it reported that they were over at the ski hill, the first crossing of the bridge there, and the west foreman had fallen through the bridge and drowned. And they were going to go back and try to find his body. Well, when they got to the depot, there were two men that still needed to be rescued on the east side, and they knew that the guy on the west side was dead and gone. So they hopped on that helper and ran it over to where the bridge was right here. And they got the two guys out, and where the two guys were in the wreck, which was right here, they couldn't get to them because they were on the wrong side of the river, of the creek. The creek was so high, so Kate had to lead them back to her house and then over to here and then down the right of way so they could get over here to rescue them. And they did that. And so they got rescued. So the four men on the pusher in that direction, two died. They never found the body of one. And here's an interesting thing. If you die and they find your body, The railroad gave the family $5,000. If you die and they don't find the body, you only get $2,500. I don't know what kind of thinking that sounds, yeah, anyway, so they lost 2 men on the east side because of a bridge, and they lost 1 on the west side because of a bridge. And both the foremen, both the east foreman and the west foreman, both died in the flood. So Kate took her 3 months to revive her health, and people thought the Shelley family was destitute. They didn't have anything. You can see where they were living. And so they raised some money that was given to the family, and it helped them they didn't get a new house right away, but it helped them to.
Tell them what the railroad gave them.
So anyway, the first time, so over the next 10 years, there were several events trying to raise money for Kate and her family. But after the first wreck, the railroad, I had to put this on my card so I could remember, because I couldn't remember. The railroad, they raised $500, and of the 500, the railroad gave 100 of that. The railroad also then later gave them some coal, tea, flour, coffee, potatoes, soap, and clothes. So they weren't exactly flush with money and helping her out, but well, they didn't think she did anything because they'd stopped the trains and she didn't save the trains, but she did help where there were 2 wrecks where 2 men lost their lives. Okay, so moving on.
Going back.
Okay.
I think we're,
Okay, so now we're going to jump up to 1899. And August 1st, 1899, the fast mail. So it was a big deal. The railroads tried to have the fastest mail train so they would get the money to run the mail west on the train, and the fastest one would get that job. So Burlington and the Chicago Northwestern were sort of vying for who had the fastest mail train. So on August 1, it was time for the train to go west from Boone, and the engineer had laid off that day, and so there was a new sub for an engineer. He'd never run the route before as the engineer, so he climbed up into it, and he came down. We need the map. So he came down the line from Boone. So he got on the train and came roaring down here. And the first paper account I read, it said, well, we've had the experts check. We can't figure out why the train derailed. But it derailed right where the first event was, as it came around Cape Shelley Curve, right before they got to the river bridge. And it went off the rails and down into the ditch. And the cars behind it went past the engine and went a little further, and then they went off into the ditch. So the first account says, well, we can't figure out what happened. Second account says, well, they were going 70 miles an hour. That's what happened. So anyway, 70 miles an hour. Now we need the wreck pictures.
yep.
So this is 2 days later. And I don't know who took these pictures. There's a combination of pictures here. There's one guy took this picture and a couple others, and these are the ones I've always seen. And you can see how they're almost to the river. Cars are laying almost on the riverbank. The locomotive is back over here out of sight. It went over first, and it wasn't quite as deep where the locomotive was, and then the cars went by and then down in. And so there were 14 men on this train. 4 died. The engineer and the fireman both died, and then a couple of mail-related clerks died. So this is 2 days later after the wreck. They said there was 3,000 people standing here looking at the wreck. And you can see their work and the cars are relatively flimsy. Next picture. So you can see like here's the roof of the car. And here's one side of the car and the other side. It's just impeded, just shelled out, opened up and whatever. And of course the others they're further from the track, so they were going pretty good speed. Next picture.
Yep,
Those were just 2 of the wreck.
I thought there were 4.
I thought there was more.
Hold on.
Oh, there's more. There's 5.
Okay, hang on.
Okay, here's another picture. So here I think is locomotive, must be the forward, the pony trucks and so on. And you see the rest of the train derailed towards the bridge. Even guys that can't walk are there. Okay, another picture. So here you can see where they've winched the locomotive up beside the tracks. See the bridge in the background. And next picture. Okay, first train through. I don't know how much later this was. There wasn't a lot of damage done to the track. It was just going too fast. So I would say the next day maybe or so. And so this is an eastbound train towards Boone. I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cars, one locomotive. Here's the remains of the locomotive from the wreck. And the standard locomotive and train coming through. These pictures were taken by an Ogden photographer. He was actually an ornithologist as a hobby. He took pictures of birds, and then he took pictures of whatever else was going on around the town or near. And so he came out. His dad was the harness maker in Ogden. And he, as a kid, he's 1920 when he took these pictures. He also had a hobby. He liked bicycles. That makes him almost related to him. Anyway, so one of the pictures, and I think it's the next one, has a picture. Yeah, right here. There's a bicycle there and a bicycle there. And there weren't any roads to this wreck, so they had to ride the bicycles down the shoulder of the railroad. Anyway, so I ran into a railroad account, the paper account, and then a news account in the paper from Boone. It said 3 guys rode their bicycles from Boone to Ogden, and back Boone to Ogden. That's about 10 miles in an hour and 5 minutes, and they rode it on the railroad tracks. So they rode in the center between the rails and sometimes on the shoulder. In the center, they could ride there if the ballast was high enough so the ties were sticking up. But I can't imagine riding in an hour and 5 minutes, 10 miles down a railroad ride. But anyway, so biking was a big deal back at that time. And apparently somebody rode their bikes out to the wreck. So this is another train passing through there. It's headed towards Boone. Another passing. Okay, next picture. Okay, so in 1899, unrelated to the Shelley wrecks, this picture was made by William Henry Jackson. And William H. Jackson was a famous Western photographer. He had a studio in Omaha for many years, and then he later had one in Denver, took lots of railroad pictures and other pictures of the West. And the reason he was here was he was on this train. And this train was a private train, owned or whatever you want to say, paid for by the Lackawanna Railroad. The Lackawanna Railroad was part owners of the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, and they were just running around the West, seeing what they could see and maybe looking for places to invest their money. The Lackawanna Railroad was a anthracite coal hauler in the east, and at that time it was a very lucrative railroad, and they had money. And so 1899, anyway, they were there and he took this picture. And of course, it's Moingona's here, Boone's over here. And he took the picture on that very same bridge. It's kind of blurry for a professional photographer, I think. Anyway, all his pictures were taken 11 by 14-inch glass negatives. So I don't know what happened, but it got a little blurry. And you can also see, it looks to me like the ends of a bunch of pilings under this bridge. So the original bridge probably had driven pilings, and then they built stone to hold it up later. I don't know, I'm just guessing. Okay, next picture. Another picture of the same bridge on the different vantage point. Looks like he's standing in the water. But anyway, okay, so now this is between Boone and Ogden. In around 1900, the railroad changed their signaling system and they built what they call signal towers. And they built them where there wasn't a depot agent. They were trying to get more people with more eyes on the single track railroad so they could put more trains down the single track because business was getting better. And so this is the railroad track going down to Moingona. Right here is a signal tower in the middle of the forest. And right here across the tracks is the signal tower. So I don't know why they built towers. Maybe you could see better. I don't know. But anyway, next picture. It shows a close-up of the tower. So this is what the tower looked like. And the guy would have, the tower operator would have probably been up here. I don't know what the bottom was for, if anything. So this is the guy at work. I don't know who this is. Maybe it's a female. I don't know. But anyway, so these towers were manned by 2 people. Every 12 hours, 24 hours a day, you're on. So 2 guys, 12 hours each every day, 7 days a week. The only way you get out of it is get sick or beg off, lay off, quit, whatever. But two guys manning the tower. So these guys didn't have to know telegraphy or, yeah, they just had a phone line so that the dispatcher could get to them. So they were paid less than a regular depot agent. And they put them in these places where the depots were too far apart and they wanted to control the trains. They wanted to know where the trains were so they could get more trains down this single track. So anyway, go ahead, I'll get a picture. So this is a picture of Belle Plain, and it just shows, this is a regular interlocking tower. And you can tell, see this wooden, looks like something to walk on. That's just a covering that covers iron pipe that run to the switches and to some of the signals. And so usually this kind of an operation would be where 2 railroads cross. And I don't know what at Belle Plain, but it was a subdivision point. A subdivision is one that's between 2 divisions. And so anyway, they had an interlocking tower. But here's the ever popular signal tower down here, and you can see the signal beside it. And again, 2 guys, 7 days a week, two guys a day. Anyway, next picture. So this shows a signal tower at Dunlop. Well, single track. There's your signal set in front of it. And this, it says 1920. This, whoever made that was not correct. These signal towers were put up around 1900, a little before and a little after they disappeared. Because when they double tracked it, went to 2 tracks, they didn't have the problems of getting the trains over the road as they did when it was just single track. And you can see the second one. I mean, find that kind of interesting.
Wouldn't that just be to go into the yard? And the same thing at Belle Plain? That Belle Plaine picture, there's a hot box detector sitting on the north side of the tracks. Was that looking west? Do you know?
Let's have the Belle Plaine picture. I doubt if it's a hot box.
There's a hot box detector that sits almost, if that's looking west.
Well, you mean now?
Well, I'm saying that I think they put it in almost the same place, and that thing, that other on the south side, if that's the south side, that would have to go, there's a small yard there. It's all gone now.
Sure. There was.
But that would have been, I would think, to bring, because there's 5 or 6 tracks in that yard,
Well,
or there was.
1900, there wouldn't have been a hot box detector.
No, I understand that
Okay,
part, but
okay.
I find it interesting if that's looking west. And that's on, that little one is on the north side, that would be, they just took that old one down and stuck something else up there. The thing on the south is long gone, but there's also a Y track there. And it's been there forever. Is there anybody here that worked in Belle Plaine? No.
Well, Belle Plaine there was a branch that ran down to Cold.
Yes, yes,
And there was a big roundhouse. and all
Yes.
kinds of-
yes. And that's why I think that signal house is there.
I think that's what Western Belle Plaine.
That's where I'm going.
Big cattle up in there.
Yep.
I think that's in Western.
Yep, I think so too.
I have no idea which direction it's look like.
Well,
Okay.
just railroaders, that,
Okay, moving on.
Okay.
Okay. So now this is the picture. Well, I bought this off the internet about not 18, about 1995. And on the back of this picture, I got that here. It says, picture was taken at Moingona about 1899 while the engine was in pusher service on Moingona Hill. Well, he wasn't a pusher, but anyway, it says, my father, Scott Norton, was fireman in the gangway. Scott. And the engineer was Johnny Feller. And the conductor is John Watt, standing on the ground. And he said Moingona still had the old 2-story depot then. And there was a water tank. And a cinder pit and a coal. Some way to get coal into the tenders. And back then, the coaler that they had in Moingona was you shoveled it into a big round iron bucket. And then you winched it up high and swung it over the tender. And then you knocked the latch out of the bottom of the bucket. And a half a ton of coal or a ton of coal would drop into the tender. That's how they put coal in the tender at that time. He says, notice how Dad had the bell polished and the front end was dark plumbago. And to be plumbago means graphite. He's talking about this. And back then, the firemen always had to wipe the engines down and have them be clean. And so the idea of the graphite is that this part of the locomotive would get pretty hot and the paint wouldn't hold. And so they put this graphite on to make it look good and stay. Okay, next picture. This is a picture of a helper running backwards into Boone. So the helper has hooked on nose to nose with the regular road locomotive. Now, I've been a rail fan for 65 plus years, and I've never seen a helper running backwards. It seems like they're always pointed in the right direction. But what they have to say about this is, somebody writing this, it says, the operation of the helper engine on this grade running in reverse was not uncommon. As the engines neared their time to be worked on in the back shops in Boone, they were relegated to the Moingona line as helper services. And that's where they filled out the rest of their hours before it was time to tear the locomotive down and do whatever servicing they had to do. And so you can see where on this line where that would happen a lot, because this would have been the engine to run up and down on the west side to Ogden to help. But if the one already to Boone is already gone, then take the Ogden helper, and that's what you get is one running backwards up the grade. Which is kind of cool. Like I say, I've never seen them before. So.
You can see it, so that Lincoln couplers.
Yes. Yeah, the automatic knuckle couplers they're using today didn't really get mandated to be there until the early 1900s. Okay, if you can find where we are, I'm lost.
Exactly. Hmm.
Okay, so once you got the Moingona, we're going up the grade. When you get up to the top of the grade, the railroad track would turn west and go straight into Ogden. Well, where it turned west, these little steam dummies, these little 040 construction locomotives were set off to the side. Next picture, there was also this steam digger, crane, whatever it's called, sitting there. And you see how it's just sitting on a short piece of track. This equipment's gonna work to build the right of way out to the new bridge, the new high bridge that they're building. And the way it gets out there is you take the rails off back here, you put them on here, you move it forward, then you take the rails in the back and that's how they got out there. It'll take forever. But that's how they build the right of way out to the bridge to hook up to the double track on the high bridge in the spring of 1901. Okay, next picture. So the guy, Ogden photographer, went over to the high bridge. This is a little later. And they're starting, this is Boone. I don't know what the smokestack would be. We're looking east, and this is Boone. So here are all
Islands.
whatever you call them, the footings for the steel trestle that they're gonna put up. And they're all laid all the way across. You can see that. And this is the derrick that's gonna lift the bridge parts and rivet them together. Okay, next picture. This is not exactly the Moingona line. So now he's gone to the Boone side and he's looking back towards Ogden. Look at all the trees. It's a river valley full of absolutely no trees. They've sawed down everything there. Anyway, so here is the derrick or whatever you call it. It lifts up these iron ridge sections, and then it was all riveted, hot riveted together. And I knew an elderly fellow when I first came back to Ogden after college, and he said as a kid, they went out there and watched, and they would heat up the rivets on the ground, and he would have a pan, sort of like a kitchen pan. They put the hot rivet in it, and you could throw it up in the air, and somebody further up on the bridge would catch the hot rivet and throw it up to the next guy until he stuck it in the hole, and with a mallet, hammered the rivet in. That's how they put the bridge together. Okay, next picture. So now he's back down on the ground near where the river is, looking up at the derrick that lifts the bridge parts. Next picture. So all this stuff. Okay, so that's what it's got a boom on it, so we lift up each. And of course, these weren't together. They had to rivet these all together. And of course, same way with the bridge sections, trusses. Next picture. Okay, this is taken a few years after the bridge was completed. And here you can see getting bigger locomotives, and you got 9 or 10, 2, 4, 6, 9 cars. So this would be a westbound. Okay, next picture. Okay, we're back to Moingona. So in 1903, in October, the railroad came to Kate and said, would you be our depot agent? And I'm sure it was anyway, and she said she would. And Kate was not learned, but obviously she would So what was her job? So she would sell tickets, she would bill freight, and that was about it. Moingona was now on this branch line where the high bridge bypassed it, and so there were 2 trains a day, a passenger each way, and it was called the Stub, and it ran from Carroll to Boone or Carroll to Ames, one each way every day, and that's how they kept servicing Moingona. And the only reason they kept the tracking, I suppose, was for the business at Moingona. By 1903, when she took over, most of the coal mines had been mined out in Moingona. There was still some coal being shipped there. The mines in Moingona were shipping mines because they sold their coal to the railroads. And I suppose there was still a little of that left, but the longer she was there was just less and less business. So this shows her at the second depot. The first depot burnt in 1901, the big one that had the 2 stories and whatever. And then there was so it burned in 1901. And then they had a temporary boxcar for a depot. And then by the time Kate came to work, they had built this little depot. Okay, next picture. Same little depot. Here's Kate, 10 years older. Looks 30 years older. And anyway, it's about 1910. Okay, next picture. While Kate was there at the depot, one of the things she did, she wasn't getting paid much money, obviously. One of the things she did to raise money was she had a postcard made with her picture on it, and she would sell them for a nickel to anybody who would buy one, souvenir. And apparently she sold quite a few. So between 1903, when she took over, and 1910, when she got sick and went to the hospital, she was there. And so at least on one occasion that I found on the railroad, there was some kind of a big weekend event in Boone, and they could buy tickets on the railroad, and they would go over the high bridge and celebrate the mightiness and the high bridge, go to Ogden, and then they'd switch to the Moingona line, come down to Moingona, and they get to stop and see Kate, and then they go back to Boone. So I guess you call that the Kate Shelley loop. Okay, next picture. So I had a friend who gave me these pictures some years back, and she and her husband had been out on a weekend, and they took pictures of Kate's old house, obviously abandoned. I don't know when it became unused. You can see it's in pretty tough shape. Next picture. There it is. Well, in 1970, some vandal burned it down, set fire to it. It's gone. And again, you can see, you can admire the farm ground. Okay, next picture. So when Kate came to work and then got sick, she left, and a guy from Ogden was hired to be the substitute agent there. And after a week or two, he'd gone off duty, and shortly thereafter, the depot burned down. The one we go back a couple pictures to the depot of Kate. Another one. This, that building there caught fire and burned down. Well, they figured out that the guy that was the agent, the relief agent there, had stolen $8, and he lit fire to the building to cover up his theft. And it wound up, he got 5 years in the pen for $8. So then after that building was gone, they built this building. This picture shows the building moved to a farm and just being used as a storage shed. Still has the Moingona sign. Wouldn't mind having that. Anyway, and it was on Mr. Boone was his name, I don't know his first name. Boone, just like the town Boone. It was on his property, and then the next stop for it was moved up to the ledges where they had used it for an animal shelter at the ledges. And somebody torched it, and that's where, so it disappeared. So it got burned down. Next picture.
Okay, it's just about two.
Yeah,
Did you and Mike talk about?
no.
Okay,
So how many pictures we got left?
I don't know. About 30.
Okay, so we've gone through, what, 45 pictures. Mike yacked it up. We got about 30 pictures left. Anybody want to take a break? Some of you got sore butts, I know you do. Should we just keep going, or you want to take? Just keep going. Okay,
Doug, your voice is getting softer and softer. Do you need a drink or anything, or?
gonna take a swig of water here and then we'll see if we can make it. Yeah. Sure, oh, yeah. Okay, next picture. So, guy by the name of Myers collected a lot of early pictures, and we've seen some of his collection here. And his collection got donated to the museum here. Anyway, he was also instrumental. He was, for 10 years, he was the head of the Boone County Historical Museum. And while he was that, he was instrumental in getting the Beaver Depot, this is the Beaver Depot, moved down to Moingona and installed as the Kate Shelley Museum. And so this was the end result. And it was very nice for a few years, quite a few years. And of course, now the rail car has been sent to salvage heaven. But the depot's still there, but it's not open. Next picture. Okay, so this is 1955. And Chicago Northwestern had been hauling all the Union Pacific passenger trains to Chicago, from Omaha to Chicago. And in 55, Union Pacific moved their trains to the Milwaukee Road. And so Northwestern, to replace some of that lost service, instigated and started a passenger train they called the Kate Shelley. And it ran from Boone to Chicago. And so this is it, and this is the last time it ran. And so in 55, it started from Boone to Chicago. In 56, they changed it to Cedar Rapids to Chicago. Then in 57, they changed it to Clinton to Chicago. And then it ran that way until 63. And they just dropped the Kate Shelley name and it became number 1 and number 4. And it ran from Clinton to Chicago until Amtrak came along in 71. But this is supposedly the last Kate Shelley train in 1963 that ran from Clinton to Chicago. Okay, next picture. Okay, now we're back to the other side, the Ogden side. And this is the first iron bridge. So back in the 1880s, 1879 to 1883 or 4, they rebuilt all the bridges on this line. And the rebuilding involved stone abutments with iron bridges. This is the first iron bridge coming down towards Moingona from Ogden. There are a couple other bridges they built before it, but they're stone arch bridges, and they're still there today. They're still standing in the timber. You have to get out of your car and trespass to go find them. But anyway, this would have been the first iron bridge. And this train would have been, well, just regular train. You can see it's probably a 460 maybe. So somewhat light engine. It's going down grade. And all these people here with their suits on they're not rusticators. That's a city dude who's out in the country. They're there for something, and my fertile little mind says, this isn't very far from what they call Baton Springs. And Baton Springs is just a spring of water. And back in those days, they would have picnics and parties there. And so this is an outing for a church group, I'm sure. And this church group included that photographer from Ogden. And so he's got his camera. Anyway, next picture. So this is right south of Baton Church. The right of way comes up, it follows that little creek that goes by there, and that creek originally was called Noah Creek. Then it was called Granny Branch Creek, and now it's called nothing, no name. Anyway, so this is a westbound train, 3 locomotives, 2 helpers and a single, and you see that string of boxcars making money that day. And so the photographer's on an overhead gravel road, people type bridge, where you can drive your horse over or your car. And this is before 1901 when the high bridge opened. So this is about 1900. It's the westbound. Okay, next picture. Oh, by the way, let's go back to that one. This is a telltale. I don't know, I assume most of you know what that is. It has leather straps or some kind of straps hanging down. And if you're on top of one of those cars and you feel that strap go over your head, you need to hit the top of the car because it says that there's an obstruction ahead that will wipe you off the top of the car if you don't do something to avoid it.
And why would you be on the top of a car?
And the reason you're on the top of the car is because there were no air brakes. And the brakemen did just exactly that. They ran up and down from car to car and they tightened and loosened the brakes. So a telltale is just that. It's telling you you need to avoid this bridge that's coming, and the photographer's standing on the bridge. Okay, next picture. This is the bridge he was standing on. And you go right over here 1/4 of a mile and the Baton Church is right there. So this train has 2 locomotives, so 1 helper and it's a freight. And here's those well-dressed gentlemen that we saw earlier. And I'm sure they're still part of that party. And the guy's still got his camera. Okay, next picture. Okay, this is a wonderful picture. This is Baton Church.
Chapel.
Chapel. And anybody know what this is called?
Old Highway 30.
Lincoln Heights. Yeah, it says right there. Anyway, so the church doesn't have a basement. And they put a basement under it in 1923, so we know that this is before 1923.
Is that the original location for that church?
Yes, only location, yeah. So that's Highway 30. 1913, they designated that road as Highway 30. So this marks the first crossing of the Transcontinental Railroad with the Transcontinental Road. So right down, you see how the road necks down right here, right there. The road gets skinnier. That's where the railroad crosses. The railroad comes up over here and goes behind the church and beyond that house, comes right over here, and then it turns here on a curve and goes straight into Ogden. This is Ogden. Okay, next picture. This is 1898, and our roving photographer in Ogden came across this train, and they're unloading these carts and rail. And what they're doing is they're digging out the right of way to make way for 2 tracks, because in 3 more years, there's going to be a bridge that's double track. And so they're double tracking here. So they're digging out dirt and they take these rails and they make little narrow gauge rails along here and they dig the dirt. Next picture. It's a highly mechanized operation. Here's guys with shovels filling the carts. Here's 4 horsepower. Here's one pulling another one. And so essentially, they dig the dirt out and then they haul it down along the line till there's a place where it's low and they need to fill it in. And so over 100 years, the railroad slowly becomes less up and down and more flat. And that's what's going on there. Okay, next picture. There's the crew. There's the horses, and you see the carts behind them. Okay, next picture. So this is the first depot in Ogden. It's the second location for it, but it's the first depot. So the depot, so Ogden was started in 1866 when the railroad was built through. They built it to the east bank of the Des Moines River down by Moingona in 1865. Built across the river in the winter of 65, 66. And then from Moingona, they built to Council Bluffs that summer. So in 1868, the railroad built a depot for Ogden. Looks just like the one at Moingona. It's just a carbon copy. Originally, it's set over here, right here in this location in 1866. Well, then following 1866, the railroad and the Litchfield Land Company got a spat, and they both claimed they owned the section that this land is right here. Litchfield Land Company, every other mile back for 6 miles on both sides of the river between Fort Dodge and Des Moines, for doing something. Not much, but doing something. And the railroad got every other section back when they built the railroad west. Well, it turns out where Ogden is, they both claimed the same section. So it went to court. The court ruled that Litchfield owned the section. And so they replatted Ogden. And when they replatted Ogden Street, 4th Street, which is right here, going across here, 4th Street ran right through the depot. So in 1878, the railroad picked the depot up from here, moved it across the other side, and then brought it down east to this location, which is right south of the city park. Okay, next picture. This is the look in the other direction. You can see the city parks here, Congregational Church here, Ogden's first water tower here. Anyway, so there's, and that looks just like the Moingona depot that we were looking at earlier. Next picture. So now it's 1925, and our roving photographer from Ogden is on the roof of the harness business. And the train comes through, and he took a picture of the train, and the only thing that's really cool is here's this big cannon on the railroad car. And it's after World War I and before World War II. But the other thing is, this is the city park here. Here's an outhouse. Lumber yards over here. I want somebody to tell me what this 3-story, 12 by 12 building is. Yeah, I like all those thoughts, but I don't think it's either one of those. But anyway, it is something. So the North School sits right across the street, right here where we can't see. Okay, moving on.
Okay, what's a tourist camp?
Okay, a tourist camp. The tourist camp is right here. That's why the outhouse. And a tourist camp has a place for you to park your car, put up your tent, and stay overnight. When you're traveling Highway 30, you know, from San Francisco to New York. And so it was well used in the 20s. And in 29, they paved Highway 30. Then it got even more use. Okay, moving on. This is a picture in Ogden taken from the top of a grain elevator, and we're looking southeast And here, this is the Emmons St. L Railroad right here. And right here is the Chicago Northwestern right of way. Here, they cross right here. Here is an interlocking tower. And the reason they have an interlocking tower is before the interlocking tower, every train that came had to stop and look both ways and then proceed across the crossing. And that includes the Chicago Northwestern and the Emmons St. L. So the Chicago Northwestern put in an interlocking tower so they could control the traffic and then they wouldn't have to stop. And the problem with, there's a couple of problems with stopping. One is you gotta get started. And the second one is from here east, the railroad, Chicago Northwestern went up over a hill and 15 pictures back there, we were looking at them digging out dirt and whatever. Well, there they were digging out that hill so they could make it more level, so that engines could start and go faster. But anyway, they put in a interlocking tower so that.
Is that on Second Street?
That's right behind Sherwood's.
Yeah.
Here's Sherwood's right here. Yeah, Second Street right here. Okay, next picture. This is the interlocking tower. This is Tom Beck. He had some notoriety. I don't think it was bad. It just had some notoriety. And not too many levers. There wasn't a whole lot going on there. The Emmons St. L had at the most 6 trains a day. And the Northwestern would have, at that time, would have been running 16. Somewhere in that. Okay, next picture. This is what an interlocking tower looks like after it catches fire. So the night operator was cleaning a lamp or something, we don't know. He died in the fire. But this is what happened when there was an oopsie. And so they rebuilt it. I'm sure they used the same, here's the levers. Use the same levers and rebuild it. Next picture. Okay, so now we're standing on the ground. This is the Emmons St. L right away right here. Chicago Northwestern right away comes right through here. There's the interlocking tower, goes right over here. And that earlier shot in the air, he was up here in this screen elevator. When we took that picture. Okay. Oh, let's go back just for a minute. You see all the railings and stuff? That's a sidewalk. It's a elevated wooden sidewalk with fences, with sidewalks. That way, if you're inebriated, you don't fall into the marsh. And that was really common. The railroad had to do that. They had to supply that. Okay.
Which was common, the inebriation or the walk?
I think inebriation, but however you say that word, was very common. There were a lot of guys at the bar. Okay, so this is it's probably taken from the school. School had a bell tower of sorts, and this is looking south, and this is, let's see, this would be 2nd, and this is 3rd Street. And so 3rd Street, anyway, so the interchange track right here, Emmons St. L came down 2nd Street, it's over here. So these are cars sitting on the interchange track, and then these are just cars sitting on the siding. Here's Ogden's depot. 2-story depot, and here's the freight house beside it. Okay, next picture. This is Ogden's 2nd depot. Ogden's 1st depot we looked at, and it was built in 1868, moved in 1878, and finally they got a new one. They built this one in 1919, and they built it to 1901 plans. Guy by the name of Frost was a noted architectural engineer or whatever, provider of drawings, and he did a lot of work for the Northwestern, and he designed like the Chicago depot and the Cedar Rapids depot, whatever. Well, he drew a plan for Ogden's depot in 1901. But at that time, Ogden and railroad were spatting about how many crossings there should be. Ogden thought they needed 8 crossings on the track. And the Northwestern thought maybe they needed none. So anyway, they didn't build the depot because they couldn't agree on the crossings. So then the state of Iowa came up with, they had a railroad commissioner. And he came in and said, okay, you guys have squabbled for 20 years. Here's what we're going to do. And so the railroad built a new depot. So Ogden got a one-of-a-kind special design depot, just like the big cities. Okay, next picture. This is a different view. So this is a view from, we're looking northeast. Here's the ever popular Highway 30. Right there. And you can see why people took the train.
Yeah.
So see, there's the water tower over there. The water tower, the main streets over here. And again, there's a building either coming down or going up, I don't know. But anyway, this is the new depot. Next picture. Okay, now we're looking northwest. The double tracks in. I think there's a highway here, concrete highway maybe. And here's a eastbound train coming. And Highway 30 was cemented in 1929. Okay, next, is there another picture? Yeah, oh, this is my favorite. So, so on eBay, that's where I spend all my time. I don't sleep. I just mess with bicycles and look on eBay. But anyway, this is a picture, and this is in Ogden. And the photographer, I don't know who he was, but he's standing on 4th Street looking west. And so, see this tower here? And that tower is the watchman tower for the road crossing. Here's the crossing arms. And this is 6th Street. So he's protecting 6th Street. And I thought to myself, well, why 6th Street? Well, 4th Street had a depot sitting in the middle of it because they redid the town, replatted the town. And so then the railroad eventually moved the depot and got it out of 4th Street, and that became the main street. But in this picture, obviously 4th Street is not being used as the main, it's 6th Street. Okay, next picture. Here's that same elevated crossing shack, and they've taken it down and they're busy taking the shack off of the elevated part. Here's the steps up to it. Okay, next picture. Here's the shack. They put the shack on 4th Street, and all the time I was growing up, 4th Street had a crossing guard 24 hours a day in Ogden, because the school's over here, and Main Street's over here. And this guy's name is Jim Jones, and he was a friend of my mom and dad's. And he had
That's our cousin. Yeah, that's our cousin, Jim Jones. Yeah.
there you go. Anyway, he had a lift on one foot. About one leg was 3 inches shorter than the other. So anyway, and most of the crossing guards had some physical issue, and they would be employed as crossing guards and probably paid less. Well, anyway, there's a big compressor station in Ogden, and so they put a lot of pipelines in starting in the mid-30s. And here's empty gondolas. They just emptied all these pipes out, which would go into another line, leaving Ogden, going somewhere else. So they could pump gas from Oklahoma and Texas to Minneapolis to Ogden. Everybody has gas service. Well, the cool thing about this shack is it's sitting right out at the end of the buildings here on the east end, right next to the street, right east of the depot. That's the very same shack. Okay, that's it, isn't it? Here it is.
It is.
Anybody got a question? Yes.
Oh,
Oh, okay, so the Moingona line. In 1928, the post office gave up the ghost. And in 1928, they quit running trains over the Moingona line. And in 1933, they tore the tracks up.
So it all got, they didn't keep one end and then the other, all one at once.
Yeah, well, they kept a big. There was a long straightaway in Ogden. From East Third Street out to where it curves now to go to the High Bridge. There was a long siding there that always they stored extra cars on when I was a kid growing up. And that was the attachment to the Moingona line. And so when I was in 1968, I walked from Baton Church, I walked the right of way to the sewer plant in Boone. And it was in the late winter, early spring, and we could walk across the river. It was all frozen over. So we walked it all the way over. And it's still, the right of way is mostly still there. And it's mostly been moved to private ownership. But nobody does anything with it because it's in the ditch. It's in the river or creek valley. And it's not a good place to put anything, so it's still there. Yes.
Before the High Bridge was put in, how many trains a day were there?
Well, I think about 1900, there was about 7 each way a day, 14, 15, 16. On a single track. It was busy. And really busy at Moingona because they had to push almost all of them up the hills. Any other questions?
Jack Shelley from WHO, was that a?
So,
Be an aunt?
yeah, so Jack Shelley. So Kate had 4 siblings. She was the oldest. The next youngest was James, and he died at the railroad bridge in Moingona. He went swimming and he couldn't swim. Anyway, he drowned. And then there were 2 girls, Mamie and I think Helen. And then the youngest was John. And I think John is the father of Jack. And if you're old enough, you know who Jack Shelley is. Anything else?
Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for attending.